Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name is Dabney, and I am an evolutionary astrologer. Today, I'm welcoming Camille Michelle Gray, who is a fantastic astrologer that I had the pleasure of hosting on the OPA Mercury Hour to talk about Neptune and Aries. Excuse me, Neptune and Pisces,
Yeah.
and just the Neptune and the Black experience. And it was a really powerful presentation, really beautifully presented. So I will put a link to that so everyone can go and see her presentation because it was incredibly articulate and very thought-provoking. But today, what we're going to be talking about is Saturn going into Aries. And as we talk about Saturn going into Aries, there's no way we cannot talk about Neptune also going into Aries and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So really what we're talking about is the astrological weather of the day.
Right.
So um, before I welcome her completely, I do want to say that she is available for readings, she gives talks, and she has been a contributor on the Christopher Brennan Astrology podcast. So really very accomplished for being a relatively young astrologer, which is honored that she wanted to come on my, old lady channel. So anyway, Camille, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so first and foremost, I like to talk, obviously. So I do want to let you sort of introduce yourself. Was there anything that I was missing or that you would like to say?
No, I started astrology, I guess, for the astrology nerds in the audience on the precipice of my Saturn return, and it was a career shift in a lot of ways. So yeah, like since then, I've just been happy to build up my practice and really anchoring into evolutionary astrology, as you do too. But also kind of mixing it with traditional techniques, which is like the Chris Brennan connection. And I like to say, I think traditional Hellenistic astrology tells you what, but evolutionary astrology tells you why. And so I really, really like that in the storytelling that's there. But I think you got it all covered. That's kind of
Okay,
like who I am. Yeah.
lovely. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I think the one thing I forgot is that she's based in Washington, D.C. So she is, in the center of all of the chaos that's happening right now. So she's probably got all sorts of astrological thoughts about that. But right now, we are ourselves on the precipice of Saturn entering into Aries, which happens on the 24th of this month of May. So, you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on just, the initial Saturn going into Aries?
Yeah, so this is really, really powerful because not only is it entering a new sign, but it's entering the first degree of the zodiac. So the new beginnings are kind of like multifold here. And I think, Saturn in Aries politically and culturally can show up in a myriad of ways. But personally, and from an evolutionary perspective, I've been leaning into it as like the burden of beginning something new. And, Aries wants to move fast. Aries wants instant success or instant results. But Saturn will really be that steadying force that allows you to cultivate and reap and kind of sow, right, in ways that are like more sustainable. But the initial kind of like lift or learning curve or like hurdle into that new beginning, I think is going to be that classic Saturn challenge in a lot of ways. But there's ways to use it quite well. I think it can be empowering, especially for selfhood and especially for challenging yourself to see what it is that you can actually do and accomplish once you put like fear away.
Yeah. So when you bring up fear, that's it's such a powerful Aries word.
Mm,
And so, as I was taught about Aries, Aries is all about confronting fears. And to say that Aries energy is fearless, I think is erroneous.
yeah.
Aries may appear fearless, but Aries is really overcoming those fears and finding courage. And
Yes.
so there is that sort of initial challenge that
Yeah.
we're all going to be facing as Saturn moves into
I
Aries.
love that because I kind of say the same thing for the opposite sign Libra. Like Libra is balanced, but what I like to say is like Libra doesn't get there if not through the extremities. So Libra can also be a kind of like, an influence that does kind of pull you side to side. So I really like that distinction of like Aries grows into fearless by consistently, right, confronting the fear. I think that's a really good distinction.
Yeah,
They're
and
not
and
born that way
right.
sometimes.
We're exactly. And I think that I have a lot of Libra energy, and
Mm,
I can validate that I have had a lot of extremes in my life. So, and the, but that is how you then get to that balance point. So Saturn is
absolutely.
all about structures. Um, so when we look at our own personal life, okay, so let me back up. So
Mm,
one of the things that I talked about as Pluto moved into Aquarius is sort of like this is, we're starting something new.
mhm.
And there's going to be a new vision with this Aquarius in your own personal charts. I kind of similarly feel that way. Like Saturn and Pluto transits in our own personal charts are always kind of the most challenging to navigate, but also the most rewarding, I find.
Mm, yeah.
And so it's kind of like, all right, strap in and let's get to work is a little bit of a Saturn transit. And there's the we can be depressed and like feel like we have a big hill or a mountain in front of us that we have to climb.
Yeah.
But with this Aries, it's almost like this new beginning, like we have more energy to climb it than ever before.
Absolutely. And even thinking about how that Pluto in Aquarius is forming a very energetic sextile to Saturn when it enters Aries and also Neptune when it enters Aries. So yeah, I think a lot of people in their personal lives are kind of like maybe reaching a threshold of being fed up and like reaching, things aren't working anymore or the vision has to change to adapt for like who you're becoming. And I think we certainly see that in society as well, where it's like Pluto is unearthing some toxicities that exist. And I think Aries could be like the starting pistol to like actually start to work on those things or to push back against them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when so much was in Pisces, we had
Mm,
Neptune in Pisces since 2011. We had Saturn in Pisces since I guess 2022, I believe, or maybe 2023.
yeah.
23, I think. Pisces being the end of the zodiac, there was a lot of dismantling, a
Mm,
lot of things just kind of falling apart, a lot of like just sort of the end energy. Like this this new book came out that's, talking about how, Biden was so old and like,
mm,
all these things are being uncovered now. And it just has that very like Pluto and Capricorn, you know, Neptune and Pisces, like this kind of like,
yeah.
we had these two very old patriarchal kind of men that, and whether they are not the same in any way, shape, or form, but I think for a lot of people that sat out the election, I think there was this sense of like, what difference does this even make to me? Like, I think
Yeah.
there was this kind of like, I can't relate to what's happening.
Yeah. And
So
Pisces is passive, right? It'll just sit and watch life pass it by. So I think Pisces or even Neptune moving into Pisces, which I know we'll get into later, is like waking up from that dream, waking up from the dream that the American dream works, waking up from the dream of capitalism being sustainable. So yeah, I agree, like the disillusion of all of those structures, hopefully paving the way to make new ones.
right.
Fingers
I mean, and
crossed.
that's the thing is that we're still as Neptune moved into Aries. So I'm going to put her Neptune and Pisces talk. Or it really was just more about Neptune and the Black experience.
Yeah,
And so it really wasn't specifically about Pisces, but I think that there was some resonance with that. That really, like I said, was thought provoking for me. So I'm going to make sure that that's in the show notes for people to check out. But one of the things that struck me was, there was a rise in compassion
mm,
in some ways during Neptune and Pisces. Like people did kind of talk about, Black Lives Matters and, women, like what are actual experiences versus the perception.
yeah.
Um, and a lot of that is what we're, the DEI like backlash that we're getting now. But Neptune moving into Aries, I feel like really kind of re energized people. Um,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even if it was just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little spark.
Yeah, right. So what do you think about Neptune moving into Aries, and then now we've got the two of these very disparate energies working together?
Yeah, so I think Neptune and Pisces, their energies kind of rhyme with one another. So I think it was like a reinforcement of like being passive or, letting things wash you by or buying into an illusion. It was also like the rise of influencers and fake news, right? So like buying into the dream. Um, and so I think Neptune moving into Aries, of course, is that burst of clarity, but I also think there's going to be like a period of hangover where we're kind of like moseying around. We're like, okay, that doesn't work, but I'm not quite sure how to move forward. Like we can't do that anymore. We can't get intoxicated by that anymore. So I do kind of see it as, again, like kind of like this wake up or kind of like this thing of how bad did it have to get or how confronting did the world have to get for you to like wake up and actually like respond or think about ways, right, to kind of respond. So that's what I hope it brings in a lot of ways. And I think Neptune and Pisces, as you said, played the role of compassion and exposing the wound and like, oh yeah, there is a disparate kind of relationship between law enforcement and Black people that we're continuing to see. It even figures like Breonna Taylor or Trayvon Martin being like sacrificial in a lot of ways, which I think is also very Piscean. So I'm hoping when Neptune then moves into Aries, there's a little more fight. There's a little bit more like it doesn't take someone dying for us to over and over again, for us to realize this is a problem and kind of like nipping it in the bud, the way I think like not Pisces, but Aries really wants to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting looking at the news right now because it's very depressing.
Yes.
Just like I vacillate from feeling somewhat like worked up and empowered to like hopeless and like wanting to put the sheets over my head in a
Totally.
way.
Yeah.
But I also know that there is kind of this interesting thing happening where, especially this week, where people who people are agreeing, like the jet from Qatar, like are like, wait a minute, that seems not great, right?
Yeah.
There seems to be somewhat of an alignment in at least in circles that can never agree on anything,
Absolutely.
that isn't okay. I don't think we're so far down the road yet with the new tax cuts for wealthy people, and like the new budget, like how that's going to harm lots of people, which can
Yeah.
also be Saturn and Aries.
Yeah.
But you've I get this sense that we're on a path of, it's happening. Like these things are happening. And so there's new energy emerging over the course of this year that allows us to then pull back
Mm.
the layers of what you so eloquently called, like what kind of American dream have we bought into, right? And so we've had an idea of ourselves, but is that the reality? And so now
Yeah.
we're being, kind of smacked in the face with reality.
I think so too. Yeah, and like you can't like denial, I think is a huge Pisces Neptunian thing, but really hard to deny Aries. It's really hard to deny the 5 alarm fire that's constantly going off, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think Neptune can even be like a softening around what in Aries can maybe be like hyper individualism, where there could be a little bit more of like blending in to like, oh no, we like collectively need to fight this, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. Like this plane is ridiculous. These tariffs are going to really hurt, right? And so I think that's one of the positive ways that I think, Neptune and Saturn and Aries can like build a new structure or build a new vision. And I think you and I talked about it, but it's also like first there needs to be the dissolution of the structure that we've relied on, whether that's the government literally being dismantled, and all the smaller, right, kind of ways that that's happening as well. It's like the world is a little bit unfamiliar. We're going to have to decide how we're going to want to like build it now that we're intentionally doing so, which I also think is very Aries.
Yeah, and this is an uncomfortable position that I haven't talked about yet on my channel, but Saturn in Aries is authoritarian.
Totally.
And so, but it's also the rebel.
Yes. Very militant on both sides.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're kind of like entering into like kind of this Star Wars sort of energy where it's like there may be with Saturn, which is about structures and authority, and Aries, which is about, can be very angry and
Yeah.
violent and controlling. And, these are shadow sides, right? But there can be more of that, of what we're getting a glimpse of coming, right? Like more
Yep.
book banning, more, people being shipped off to other countries. And, so that does send a chill, right? That's like,
Yeah.
that's not what we want. But I think there is also this energy of like, there is not in an authoritarian state, and if I know a lot of people that watch this channel also are happy to watch, Heather Cox Richardson and a lot of people that are historians and kind of say, well, this is how it goes, right?
Right.
There isn't a hero that swoops in and like saves the day.
Mm.
We all have to kind of become those heroes.
Yeah. And that speaks to the collective force of like Neptune and Aries. And you're so right. Like when a planet enters a sign, I think you're going to get all manifestations of that sign just because humanity is so diverse and people are going to like feed into the Saturn and Aries and be like, yeah, this is really conducive to my needs to be a dictator. But other people may lean into it like, oh, this is the call to like get a little bit radicalized, to wake up, right, to fight against these things. And so we will see all of it, I think, happening at once. And I think that's disorienting. I think that's the Neptune of it all as well. Um, but this is for Neptune a mini, I don't know how many years Neptune is going to be in Aries, but it's going to be a long story arc. And even for Saturn, like it's 3 years perhaps of like maybe seeing how this will play out. But many, 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 many battles, and like the overarching war, who knows? Who
Right.
wins that? Yeah.
Right. And so I guess, and this isn't to be depressing, this is to be true.
Realistic.
Right. Like we have grown up with a certain mythology, and Aries creates new mythologies.
Yeah,
And so, Neptune is the mythology. And so in our lifetimes, we have not had Neptune in Aries. And so we have lived with a certain mythology since at least World War II.
that's right. Yeah.
But we also have to recognize the different mythologies that, the Black experience is different than the mythology of the white experience.
Yeah.
Women have a very different mythology than men. And as there has been, an immigration, like immigrants, as there has been during this Pisces, Neptunian Pisces, a blending, a
Mm.
rising, a shift of like the mythology was not what people were taught in
That's right.
school as children or at the knee of their parents. That felt threatening.
Yeah,
And so that threat becomes a fear, right? And so enter Aries, the need to overcome fears.
that's right. Defend against it. Yeah,
Right. And so
absolutely.
the conscious response here, in my view, is to recognize that change is inevitable and look at it from a much more conscious view. And how can I support human beings? How can I have, be an advocate for people? How can I be loyal to my country without, you know, how can I create a new mythology that is inclusive? But if you don't have that ability to face your fears, that's when the
Yeah.
anger comes out. And you see it in the comment section. And sometimes I don't know in social media or in comments and stuff, like what's real and what isn't, right? Like what's a troll farm? Like we
Yeah.
all don't know what's real anymore. And that's a whole other
Yeah.
topic. But thank you, Pisces and Neptune. But
Yeah.
but that to me also is very indicative of like, I just am like, I read stuff and I'm like, how do people think this way? Like it's so different. And so we're
Yeah.
kind of confronted with that, I think, over and over again over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I was just speaking with a friend and kind of telling her like how naive I felt that humans would choose the course of action that's the most just or that's the most loving. Like it's just like that's the story that's been told. That is kind of the mythology. I do think there is an arc towards justice, as MLK says, but I'm just like gobsmacked that people think in the way that they do. And that's also like the rude awakening of Neptune and Aries. It's like, oh, sheesh, like I can't take for granted that everyone is like me or that everyone is pushing for love and kindness and all of these things. You have to kind of acknowledge the enemy, which hurts, which kind of sucks, right? And it also kind of makes me think, a little bit tangential, but we're getting this Saturn, Neptune, Aries story as Jupiter enters Cancer. And I
Mhm.
can't help but see what you were talking about as like community, love, togetherness, kind of square or kind of like at war or in tension with, right, the rude awakening that is happening or the pain that's very much happening and being revealed through Aries. So that'll be an interesting summer, I guess, or interesting year to see how that Jupiter plays off because it is so loving. It is so, everyone here gets a seat at the table, but there's a war being fought at the same time, you know?
Jupiter and Cancer can be a little tribal and a
That's
little
true.
nationalistic too. So that would be the shadow. But
Yeah.
my hope is that the feminine archetype, that square, is giving the Saturn and Aries something to think about.
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah.
So, the nurturing, the caring, the loving, which is the higher expression, the forgiveness,
Yeah.
the coming together, the like, oh, I don't care what's happened in the past, come sit at the table. Like we can have Thanksgiving together. Like we can we can
Yeah, I
get
love
back
that.
on track. So that's, that's the higher expression. Um, it won't be available to everyone because this is what's been coming to me. And I really, I mean, I want to thank you for what you just said, which was the Neptune and Aries is kind of like stripping away the illusion and the myth of like, oh yeah, I just thought that we were all on sort of in the same, like we all want the same things and we all do care about one another and
Mm.
like the arc of justice, but it's not really necessarily true. Which
No.
and so having that reality, which is, Neptune and Aries is like, oh, that is the reality. Like you can't really pretend anymore when we're shipping people over Afrikaners and like yet
Yeah.
we're going to ship back people from Afghanistan who were interpreters and helping us. And so it's sort of like stripping bare, probably it's almost like a caricature of what has always existed,
Oh, totally.
but it's just like so in your face that you can't ignore it anymore.
And I was hearing news of, folks in charge actively kind of moving forward with propaganda that like empathy is weak, like end empathy. And that's again like an alien moment to me because I was like, is empathy not just part of human biology? Like we need to like connect to survive. And so yeah, it was such again a rude awakening or like an Aries slap in the face that like, oh, there's a faction of people that believe this and they technically right now have the power and the resources, right, to see that vision through. And that is terrifying that you would want to erase such a fundamental part of what it is to be human. I think it's impossible not to be empathetic unless there is a psychological distress happening. You know what I mean? So I'm like, wow, like banning empathy, that is extreme in ways that are, again, shocking. Yeah.
Well, and that's also I had Christopher Renstrom on the channel and I loved something we were talking about Neptune in Aries and Saturn in Aries and I loved what he was saying was like it's just time to grow up.
Ooh.
And that's not a bad thing. Like the last time Neptune was in Aries, Neptune was in Aries during the Civil War.
Mhm.
Like there is a growing up that takes place.
Yeah.
There is kind of a, when your illusions and delusions are stripped away, that you can then see so much more clearly and make a decision from a place
Yeah.
of empowerment, because I do believe Aries is cardinal, it's empowered.
Absolutely.
And I
It's
do,
the exaltated sun. It's the sign of exaltation for the sun. So there is kind of like selfhood, identity, power, right? Radiating from that place. Yeah.
right. And Saturn in Aries, Aries is the masculine archetype in a lot of ways. And so Saturn's, there's a little bit of a like, okay, it's time to really see are you advocating for? Like, is this your best self? Like, are
Mm.
so some of the changes that are being proposed will confront some people that were supportive of it, but not really completely understanding what they were supporting. Just in,
Oof.
you know, so I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of accountability that comes with Saturn and Aries that maybe
Yeah.
everyone's prepared for.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think of Aries, or people call Aries, right, the baby of the zodiac. So what happens when like Daddy Saturn comes in to Aries? It's like, yeah, grow up.
Right.
Go till the fields, right? It's like
Right.
hard work time, you know what I mean? But I
Right,
also
and
see
that's a
that,
lot of the
yeah.
messaging that's starting to come out, like now, of course, they're framing it in misogynistic ways that, like, the little girl needs 30 dolls, right? But the
Ugh,
reality is, like, everyone's going to have to pull back.
yeah.
Everyone's going to be impacted. We will, like, everything that's happening will have a chain reaction of consequences, and that chain reaction of consequences will ultimately lead on both sides of the aisle to people waking up and growing up. Like,
Yep.
I'm by no means equally critical of Democrats, but I'm also incredibly disappointed with a lot of them. Not all of them by any, and very inspired by a lot as well.
The
Uh,
ones that have fight,
right.
the ones that are
And,
meeting the moment with the Aries
and
spirit.
that's the thing, that's who's going to come out victorious at this time. I'm going to get so many comments on this video, by the way.
That's all right. Be
I
kind.
have
We're
to
all
put
trying.
my little, like, these are my opinions. So anyway, okay. Well, so we're in for an interesting, I guess we're headed into summer at this point, right? Like, spring is coming to a close. We've been on, having all sorts of drama. And now, there is this kind of new energy emerging. So what do you have any predictions or thoughts for this summer, basically on a individual level and collective level?
Well, the biggest thing that I know is happening, there's so many transitions happening. Well, first, there's the Saturn and Aries of it all, right? So you're being called to grow up, right, in some area of your life, right, to borrow your or Christopher Renstrom's phrasing.
Yeah.
Um, and also, there will be that Jupiter ingress into Cancer. And so I think, I mean, my hope is that, and I've seen some astrologers mimicking this, there will be like a temperature cool down. There will
Mhm.
be maybe the insertion of a little bit more spaciousness or softness. Maybe it's the rise of really, really profound community work or really profound grassroots resistance to what is happening. But again, in personal ways, it's like the part of your chart that has Cancer is looking for some love, right? And some TLC at this point in time. And then also there will be a very exciting entry or a little dip preview of Uranus into Gemini, which is wild, crazy fun. And it'll be forming a trine to Pluto. It'll be forming a sextile to Saturn. I haven't actually really thought about what that can bring to the story that's, currently unfolding. Have you thought about like what Uranus in Gemini
Yeah.
is going to be? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, definitely Uranus and Gemini, I think, is going to bring a whole new era of, obviously, technology and
Oh, totally.
innovation and all of those things. But as far as like kind of the topics that we've been talking about, I think it is this sort of new way of thinking, like fresh ideas, approaching things in a fresh way. I think youth rising is also
Ooh,
going
Gen
to be
Z, we need you. Yeah.
great. We need you. And that's also,
Mm.
everything is so much faster these days, right? Like I grew up in this, the 80s and we had like everyone, there was four networks,
Mhm.
like there was no social media. We all like read magazines. Like everyone's attention span is so small these days, right? So we can't really write off these younger generations at this point because, there was this massive shift to the right, but now
Mhm.
they're shifting back to, and saying, this isn't what I want either.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they have to step up and be the arbiters of like, no, we need multi-party system. We
I was
need
gonna say another option. Hmm.
another option because I read something that they're very unhappy with those that voted for he who shall not be named are unhappy with their vote, but they're not necessarily going back and saying, I wish I had voted a different way. They're like,
That's
I just
right.
wish I didn't vote.
Mhm.
Right. And so the quickness, that's the thing. Like I see like just such fast changes that like
Mhm.
something can change in an instant. And that's the Uranus and Gemini that I think is going to emerge this summer. And it feels very optimistic. Like there's a lot of doom and gloom people out there right now.
Yeah.
So here's my optimistic take. My optimistic take is Saturn in Aries does not like recklessness or chaos.
Yeah.
That will not be rewarded.
Yeah.
So right now we do have recklessness and chaos. So I feel like Saturn in Aries will actually be, like you said, kind of you know, someone in charge, an adult in the room coming back and saying, This is not acceptable."
Yeah.
Um, I think on an individual level, people have to fight the urge to isolate. Saturn and Aries can be very isolated, and we've had enough of that.
Yeah.
Mm, Saturn and Pisces can also be isolated, but it's different. Saturn and Pisces was going down the rabbit holes of the internet.
Yeah.
And
Like dissociative
right,
isolation.
right. So this is more like I'm out on my own and I'm, the rebel. I think that all of these energies, to your point, impact us all, and there's going to be a lot of different expressions of it. The least conscious of us are going to be pulled into a direction that is an extreme.
Mhm.
But we can be as conscious as possible and say, what is Saturn in Aries? It's about, it's about loyalty, it's about structure, it's about accountability, it's about hard work. So where do I need to put in the hard work in my individual life? And so
Yeah.
to me is Saturn in Aries. Then we have the Saturn Neptune coming together, which is sort of like, what do you value? What's the new mythology? What do you care about? And so those two together to me is like we can envision something new. We
Yeah.
don't want what we had, but what is the new thing? Let's put the energy in together because Neptune, you can find community. Pluto's already in Aquarius. That's all about community. It's all about people. And we're starting to see people on the same page for the first time about it's not left, right, it's top, bottom.
Mm.
That's emerging.
Yes. That's how it's always been.
Oh, it's
Fast
always that. And
consciousness
the
leads the
and the
way.
and the top tricks the bottom into
Fighting each
splitting
other.
so we
Yeah.
don't get together and say, "Wait a second, you're the ones
Yeah.
who are pushing us both down and you're
Yeah.
you're turning us against each other." So the Uranus and Gemini piece, which is the next, well, actually, then the Jupiter and Cancer comes into play. And so I think optimistically, yes, there is going to be the people who like want to send people to camps, and there are going to be people who are going to be like McCarthyism, like calling, hotlines on their neighbors. That can be Jupiter and Cancer. It can, but I don't think that that's the vast majority of people. And I think the vast majority of people will want to find forgiveness and come together and not have so much of like rise in the temperature, like you said, like
Yeah.
And then we've got the kind of the final piece where we get a preview of Uranus and Gemini.
Yeah.
And my optimistic side for this summer is that like suddenly like there's energy again. There's new ideas. There's something that happens that changes everything and it can change in an instant. And all of these other pieces coalesce together and we're working under a new energy. But then we have fall and we get the retrogrades.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in this very dynamic few months where we sort of kind of have ideas and we're building and like we've got, things are moving. And then like we've got a little bit of stuff we got to
Second guessing. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, right.
Reconsidering.
Like redoing, like, why did we do this? How can we do it differently? And by then 2026, we'll have like 5,000 videos we can talk about. So, and then
Right.
we'll just be like rehashing the same information because it's then going back into those.
Yeah, I
Okay,
love
that's
that
my
take.
that's my take on it. So what about you?
No, I love that. I hadn't really thought about it, but you sparked a lot of ideas. First of all, I like the story of like youth rising. I hadn't thought about that in terms of like Gemini representing like youth and new, fresh things. So that is hopeful, right? Because sometimes it feels like, what is the solution? Well, Uranus and Gemini might be that push to like really find a new way forward that none of us are currently thinking about. And I think youth tends to be in that space more often than not of like, we could do it this way. Have you thought about doing it this way? Like they're bringing in all these fresh ideas. I love that. I also like what you said about, kind of life depleting Saturn and Aries as like the lone wolf caricature of like, I only need to fight this big thing, or I'm the only one who can, right, fight this big thing. So there will be a kind of acknowledgement of like, no, I can't carry this all on my own. I have to outsource some of this to community. Um, and then the last thing that I thought was really, really interesting is Saturn in Aries as being like anti-reactionary. Because what does happen on both sides is that a bad thing will happen and there will be an intense response, but it fills us out and like nothing is being like made of it. So I feel like Saturn in Aries is like, why don't you use this anger constructively? How can you use this reaction to actually build towards that new dream that you were talking about? Instead of just making a really, really compelling TikTok that goes away, right, in like 3 weeks. So I think we're gonna, and also like the social media implications of Uranus and Gemini are gonna be fun. But I think Saturn in Aries would be like, no, give that anger some staying power. Um, Make it show up in the world in really like concrete kind of ways. So I really like that thinking. And I also am hopeful that the trine between Pluto and Aquarius and Uranus and Gemini, at least for that first maybe couple of years, can be grounding, right? Because Aquarius is like this fixed earth. Like, so like Uranus and Gemini, I picture as like the new student that's really curious and eager to find the new answer, then giving it up, right, to this Pluto and Aquarius energy of like, let's make this the new normal. Let's build this idea into humanity instead of, again, it constantly being just like, what about this? What about that? But no real progress is made. So I think they're all kind of combining together to create pressure to actually do something
Yeah.
concrete. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
those
listen to new
harmonious
voices. Yeah.
aspects are great because and to your point, like social media is ephemeral. Like everyone keeps saying that, oh, everything lasts forever on the internet. Well, they used to say that, but I don't think it does. Like we're seeing that it doesn't anymore. They're
Yeah.
pulling down information, websites are going away. Things that we just sort of always took for granted would be there are leaving.
Mm.
And maybe that's okay because maybe it's time to build something new that isn't
Yeah.
ephemeral.
Yeah. I also think about that in terms of like Neptune and Pisces. When everyone is saying the same thing and something becomes saturated, it kind of loses its importance or it loses its urgency. So it's like this feeling of like, yeah, 10,000 people can be saying the same thing in unison, but if there's no one strong authoritative voice, it's just a bunch of people in an echo chamber. You know what I mean? Which could be
Mhm.
fine for creating community and like affirmation of like, okay, we're not in this alone, but it doesn't create tangible results. And I think
Yeah.
Saturn will be about tangible results.
And Saturn, so Pluto is more about crises and transformation than Saturn is. However, I do think Saturn does bring a sense of loss
Yeah.
And so Saturn in Aries, you talked about sort of that lone wolf, it is also like the terrorist. And so I do think that there is danger. There's
Yeah.
red flag, red warning signs going off everywhere. But I think that the red warning signs, we already have seen them. We've been living with them. We've been seeing them, but there might be something concretizing that then brings us together,
Yeah.
you know?
The Lone Wolf reminds me of like the Luigi Mangione saga and how he himself, as a singular figure, got us all to look at, the erroneous practices of the healthcare industry. So yeah, there will be lone wolves on both sides for better and for worse, and unfortunately violence. But hopefully, right, it can just be a catalyst, right, to get more of us moving in the same direction.
Yeah,
Hopefully. Yeah,
yeah. Cardinal signs are catalysts.
that's right.
And so, having these two things, you know, Jupiter and Cancer, Cancer's a cardinal sign too. So, yeah. Okay. Well, anything else that you wanted to touch base? I know we touched base on a lot of things, and this kind of became a little bit more of a political video, but was there anything else like that you felt, you'd passionately like to talk about or
Yeah, just to like kind of close it. So I do a lot of like research into like Neptune and the Black condition because I see Neptune now as like a significator of Black culture. And so one of the things that's really fascinating to witness in this moment of time is we get to see Neptune move into a new sign. And what does that mean for the culture? And some of the things I've just been noticing in the last few months, really, that Neptune has been in Aries is like this very loud and proud, bold proclamation of Blackness, which we see in the movie Sinners, which was like a runaway success, or we saw in like the Met Gala celebrating like Black dandyism. We kind of see it right in Beyonce Cowboy Carter, right, reclaiming the Black roots of like country music, right, and taking that around the United States. So these things are like very loud. Like I even think of Aries is the cowboy, that lone wolf, right? And so I'm really, really happy and interested in seeing what this new era of Neptune and Aries does specifically to the Black story, and if it'll map onto these Aries archetypes of like fighting or selfhood, or again being a little bit more self-reliant rather than, looking at the older solutions that were offered, maybe creating those solutions for ourselves. Or yeah, so I think there's going to be an interesting kind of amplification where I think Neptune and Pisces was like the wound, again, like the sacrifice and like the seeing of the injustice. And then Neptune and Aries will be kind of like that big response to the wound, or cauterizing the wound, really, right? So that it doesn't have to bleed so much anymore. So that's what I'm really passionate about these days. And I love looking at, the ways planets show up in pop culture. It's just always so fun.
yeah, and Neptune in Aries, the fight for freedom.
Yeah, yeah,
During the Civil War, I mean, that was a fight for freedom, quite
yeah,
literally. And so, what is that fight for freedom now? Aries likes to be free. Aries doesn't
yes,
want anyone to hold it down. So, in Saturn, there will be this kind of uncomfortableness in some ways
totally.
and that kind of plays to, like I said, the authoritarian backlash and things like
Mm.
that.
Yeah,
So
so like the last, not one of the last times that Neptune was in Aries, I think around the Civil War was like the Emancipation Proclamation, which was like, oh, great, what a great moment for us. But it just led sneakily into like Jim Crow, which was like,
right.
okay, so slavery won't exist in this explicit way. So how do we make it exist in, right, kind of like that backlash that comes? So I'm curious if there will be anything kind of like historic like that maybe happens in this era, and how that will play out for people who don't want that to happen.
Ah, yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing your talk as you research more and as
Thank
this
you.
sort of unfolds. But thanks for coming on, Camille. I think is a an interesting discussion, and boy, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I kind of try to hold on to the more optimistic side of things, and I do think that there is hope for this new mythology to be built by the people who
Yeah,
are, out here now. It's a whole like, the people running the show are still, you know, from another generation, and
totally.
it's time for, like, new energy,
Yes.
and,
May it be so.
Yeah. All right. Well, so thank you everyone for tuning in and watching. Please comment if you have any thoughts that are constructive. This is going to be an interesting one. Like, subscribe, share. As always, there is a reason and a season for it all. And the cosmos is conspiring to help us. So until next time, stargazers.